I believe, are starting at 7. So what I'm going to do is just very briefly introduce some of our speakers, and then we'll go straight on to Sir Malcolm. On my left, I've got Terry Bamford, who's had a very distinguished local government career in the UK, and for long-term interest in international affairs, the International Federation of Social Workers, and serves as trustee of Save the Children and Amnesty International, so he is well involved with international affairs. On my third and my left, I've got Elizabeth Smith, who is chairman of the Commonwealth Media Group, and she is the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association. She's just come back from Namibia. The next visit is to Lesotho. Therefore, the Commonwealth is flowing through her veins. Malcolm, I don't think, needs a great deal of introduction. In fact, any introduction at all. The former Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. He was a member of Parliament and in the Cabinet for many, many years. Not in the Cabinet until very recently, but much too long. It's not true.
My good fortune.
But Sir Malcolm was, I suppose still is, a member of the Eminent Persons Group on the Commonwealth, which was set up to look at the Commonwealth, to see, in fact, what we can do to raise its profile. And I do think it is an extraordinary institution of a group of countries voluntarily coming together, and I think has great potential for the future. I'm going to say no more, Malcolm, but ask you just to talk about your report, which I know has not yet been published, but I believe it's gone to various Commonwealth governments, and until it comes back from all those governments, it's still in draft. But perhaps you could give a bit of a flavour of what it is saying.
Chairman, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm very happy to do that. My apologies, it's 7 o'clock, we're going to have a vote, so that's why the Chairman has kindly invited me to speak at this stage. My own connection with the Commonwealth goes back really a very long way. It was when I was a student at Edinburgh University. I took part in a Commonwealth expedition, overland expedition, 200 British students. We drove our own buses all the way across Europe, the Middle East, through Baghdad, through Iran, Pakistan, into India. And this was to link up with young students in India, and also we met some in Pakistan on the way. And it was the first of several such expeditions to ensure that young people throughout the Commonwealth were aware of this extraordinary institution, this extraordinary association of countries that has existed now for some 60 years. As your chairman indicated, the Commonwealth is, of course, a unique organization. It's unique in this respect. There are many, many international organizations. When you think about it, they're either global, like the United Nations, or the World Trade Organization, or whatever, and they cover virtually every country in the world, or they're regional, like the European Union, or ASEAN, or the African Union, or Mercosur in Latin America. What there are relatively few examples of are countries that draw their membership from every continent, from every ethnic group, from every level of economic development, but which are nevertheless voluntary, which are nevertheless have something in common that has encouraged a specific number of countries to wish to join together. And although the Commonwealth has its origins in the old British Empire, it's no longer got anything to do with that. It is countries that have had a historic link together through the United Kingdom, but which, having become independent countries for many, many years, have believed and have chosen to wish to maintain a relationship, not just with the United Kingdom, but with each other. And that has proved to be a matter of some importance. That's the first point I made. The second point is that, of course, of the 40 to 50 countries in the Commonwealth, almost half of them are micro-states. Islands in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, which are independent states, but which are very small, sometimes almost minute countries, and for whom the Commonwealth is perhaps their most important international association apart from the UN itself. Because in the Commonwealth they can have regular contact as equals with the Prime Minister of India, with the President of South Africa, with the Prime Minister of Britain, or Canada, or Australia. And that is something which is very small countries, they don't normally have that kind of access, and the United Nations doesn't operate in that sort of way, except at ambassadorial level. So that is the second factor. The third factor is, of course, the Commonwealth. What binds it together, and what makes it unusual, is that it is a values-based organization. That by being a member of the Commonwealth, and in order to remain a member of the Commonwealth, you actually have to accept certain political, constitutional, and fundamental principles. Each country is different, each has its own system of government, but the basic principles of respect for human rights, democratic government, and the rule of law are not just an aspiration, they are a crucial part of membership. And indeed, the Commonwealth on several occasions over the years has either excluded a country, South Africa under apartheid was effectively forced to leave, or it has suspended membership, as has happened to Pakistan or Fiji, when democratic governments have been overthrown by armed insurrection, by armed forces. And so that doesn't happen with the United Nations. The whole point about the United Nations is universality. You may not like what's happened in a particular country, but in the interest of maintaining it as a universal organization, there's never been a question of expelling a member or suspending their membership. The Commonwealth is different because of its origins. So why an eminent person? Well, first of all, when you're asked to join an eminent persons group, you have mixed reactions. So it sounds a very grand title, but it's almost halfway to your obituary being written. You don't get deemed to be eminent until you're assumed to be approaching that stage in your career. And so you have mixed feelings about it. But the origin of this is that the heads of government at their last meeting, at the last Commonwealth Conference, were deeply worried about the way in which the Commonwealth was not able to make the kind of impact that it ought to be making for an organization of its kind. It's not that there's any hostility to the Commonwealth, far from it. There are countries still applying to join, and normally that's a good sign for an organization if it's growing rather than static or declining. But it's more the attitude of the wider public. Most people either are unaware of how the Commonwealth operates, they've heard of the Commonwealth, they've heard of the Commonwealth Games, but they don't have much of a feel for what its political and social and economic role is. And the main threat to the Commonwealth is indifference, not hostility, and particularly for a younger generation. Because most older people remember the high point of Commonwealth influence in the battle against apartheid, when the Commonwealth led global opinion, not just opinion within its own countries, but actually led the world, led the United Nations in the campaign to end apartheid in South Africa, and therefore was immediately associated in everyone's public consciousness with the campaign for greater human rights. And why is that no longer true of the Commonwealth? I think it's because although the Commonwealth is values-based, and although, as I said a few moments ago, it is prepared to suspend or expel a country for overthrowing its democratic government, it doesn't seem to be involved in very important breaches of human rights, which don't go to the extent of the overthrow of a government. In other words, what we have had in a number of countries around the Commonwealth are very severe breaches of the rule of law, very, very bad violations of human rights. But the Commonwealth doesn't seem to have responded, doesn't seem to have any power to do so. The Commonwealth Secretary General appears to have been silent, and that has been commented on increasingly. If I may give an example of where a lot of people have expressed views, when we had the very traumatic developments in Sri Lanka at the end of the insurrection in Sri Lanka with the Tamil Tigers, when many thousands of people were killed. Now, without commenting, I'm not going to comment on the rights and wrongs of that this evening. What I do say is that you would have expected, the public would have expected, that when such a traumatic event was taking place, leading to thousands of people dying, at the very least the Commonwealth would have had a position on it, that it would be expressing concern or anxiety, trying to influence events. Instead, it was assumed that this was an internal matter in Sri Lanka, that it would be inappropriate for the Commonwealth to have the view. Another example you hear mentioned is that when certain countries in, one or two countries in Africa had some very draconian punishments for homosexuality. When people were being imprisoned and threatened with death sentences or very long imprisonment because they were found to be indulging homosexual activity, which was still a criminal offence in those countries. It wasn't just that it was a criminal offence, it was the severity of the punishments being implemented that many people argued indicated an indifference to the sufferings that were going on for a section of the population in those countries. Now these are all controversial issues, and this evening I'm not going to comment on any further on any individual case. What I really am saying is that the eminent person, one of the major issues we've been looking at is how to strengthen the institutions of the Commonwealth to try to make it seen as a more active player when problems of that kind arise. And the kind of recommendations that we are making is, first of all, that the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, who is its most public face most of the time, should be someone who has the right, when he judges it appropriate, to make public comment when there are violations of human rights that may be happening in a Commonwealth country. But he shouldn't need a specific mandate to do that, but he should be in a similar position to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Ban Ki-moon does not wait for the instructions of the General Assembly or the Security Council. He's perfectly able, when he sees something happening, to express concerns and aware that the Secretary General of the Commonwealth should also be able to do it. The second area of reform is to say that what we need is an independent source of advice, not just to the Secretary General, but also to the Commonwealth governments, as to when there is a problem of this kind arising, which may be a very serious one. And therefore we are recommending that there should be a Commonwealth Commissioner for the rule of law and democracy. And then somebody who would be part of the Commonwealth, but independent of the Secretariat, and his job, or her job, depending on who was appointed, is someone of great stature, of great integrity, possibly of a judicial background, who would be able to give advice to the Secretary General and to the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group, which is the group of foreign ministers that meets from time to time, as to whether action was needed. And the third and final point I make is that what's also, we think, appropriate is that we shouldn't just see the Commonwealth responding when there is a need for some punishment to be proposed of a particular government or a particular country. Many of these crises don't just suddenly happen overnight. You see the seeds of them happening at a much earlier stage. And what we need to give to the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group and the Secretary General is a range of responses, which may begin with an offer of dialogue with the government concerned, with an opportunity to actually encourage, not in a punitive way, but in a more positive and more acceptable way, the need for change and need for sensitivity. And only if that fails, would you then begin to move towards a more traditional approach, so that the involvement of the Commonwealth Commissioner for Democracy and the Rule of Law, or of the Ministerial Action Group, would not just be in a punitive sense, but would be a way of trying to influence matters. So that is, I think, likely to be the single most important and possibly controversial part of the eminent persons group's report. But I would be mistaken and wrong not to conclude by saying that will only be 10% of the report itself. The other 90% will be dealing with a whole range of issues on development, on education, on youth, on cultural matters, a whole range of ideas and proposals as to how the Commonwealth can be more visibly effective, dealing with real problems, but dealing with realistic ways of enhancing people's quality of life. And the final point, very final point I make, is that we have quite deliberately entitled our report, which is about the Commonwealth. It's called the Commonwealth of Nations, but we're talking about a Commonwealth of the people, emphasizing that the Commonwealth is not just about governments, it's not just about states, it's not just about politicians. Ultimately, the strength of the Commonwealth is about the people who live in the Commonwealth, the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who make up such a significant part of the human race, and all of whom have a personal stake in this extraordinary organization. So our report is called The Commonwealth of the People, emphasizing that that's where the future lies, and that's what you can do.
Malcolm, well, we have Malcolm here. This is a good opportunity for you to ask questions.
Please, yes, please.
So, Let's see who would like to ask the first question. Yes.
You need an emotional quality. I mean, I think ideas are one thing, but you need an emotional quality. And what worries me is that at present it's the Commonwealth Games and the Queen. And I just have this fear that after the Queen, it will begin to just fade away. I don't see how a younger generation, other than the Commonwealth Games, can connect with it.
Right, let me try and respond to that. I don't think you should be quite as gloomy as that, though there is a problem, otherwise we wouldn't have been asked to report in the first place. I think that what the Commonwealth is missing is a clear, overarching mission, vision, that people can identify with and see as not just inspirational, but relevant to their lives. So that is, I think, the central theme, but that ought to be able to be responded to. When you go into more detail, there's a whole host of ways in which the Commonwealth does directly affect the lives of millions of people. And if that was not the case, we would not be having Mozambique, Rwanda, various other countries that have either joined the Commonwealth or who are queuing up to join. Very interesting that they're perceived to be, it's almost a badge of respectability. That if you're in the Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth is a Commonwealth of values, that is a way of saying to your own people and to the wider world, we respect these values, we've met the standard, otherwise we wouldn't be a member. That's quite important, and very relevant to all age groups at this moment in time. I mentioned half the Commonwealth countries are very small island states, or not necessarily island states, but very small countries. For them, the Commonwealth is a major interlocutor. It's what enables them to be at the big table. And one of the things we are recommending is the Commonwealth should use that opportunity to have greater influence on IMF, World Bank, G20. In the Commonwealth, we have at least 4 or 5 countries that are in the G20. South Africa, Britain, Canada, Australia, India. That is not just good for those countries, but they can then lobby on behalf of other Commonwealth countries who are not personally able to be involved in that way. So that is important. And then you have the cultural dimension, the trade dimension, and activity of that kind. So it is both the substance of what the Commonwealth can offer, but it's also the vision with which it can actually present its overall purpose. But we shouldn't get ourselves into the mind frame of believing the Commonwealth is a competitor with NATO or with the United Nations or with organizations that have real power. You can't have real power, ultimately, unless you have a common position on controversial issues. And the Commonwealth's not like that. We're not going to have 50 countries all agreeing to have the same foreign policy. Why should they? They have different interests in the region. That's not what the Commonwealth has ever been about. It's not been about being a power bloc. But it could have quite a strong soft power dimension, because that's where it actually plays to its strengths.
And would you like next question?
There is really some observation in those things before, because I'm chair of the Commonwealth Journalists Association UK branch, and forgive me for starting you, but we talk about this money. And what really I discovered was that when I was talking to 30 of the BBC, we wake up like into your session, that what we call our for, what we do. And there have been 3 occasions when I've really been surprised and impressed, but I'm still wondering the best way to get across. The first was when I went to the CJA summit in Kuching, and I suddenly realized there were these journalists there who were desperate. They were being threatened, colleagues were being killed. There was a whole world opened up, and I realized that we over here take human rights, freedom of speech for granted. And Pakistan now emerges as the deadliest, most dangerous country for journalists. So I suddenly realized that these people really need help at some point. Then I went to Solomon Islands as part of an election observatory. Again, local Solomon Islanders came, they were desperate again for advice, for any links. And then I was in a workshop at Maldives last week on democracy. And what was amazing there, which people aren't aware of it, I mean, I know it's I guess in high school know that the CPA, again, the amazing work the CPA and organization are doing. And I found that a room like this, with the former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, lawyers, former election commission of India.
Will you forgive me? I only have 5 minutes.
So what I'm going to say,
have to be able to respond to other people as well.
Do you think that there is some way you could help feed this into the government or people dealing with it here? Because that is something that is not getting.
I think you're 100% right. I mean, I think there are examples that don't just affect politicians and governments, but affect journalists, in the case that you've used, but also other sectors, like Commonwealth lawyers. I mean, the extraordinary thing about the Commonwealth is it's not just the Commonwealth. There's about 100 organisations with Commonwealth in their title, most of which are not parts of governments. They are voluntary NGOs, civic organisations, voluntary organisations. And that also, I should have said earlier, that's also what makes the Commonwealth so unique. But many of them experience the sharp end of discrimination or of problems of the kind that you refer to. And that is referred to in our report. And we try to invoke their involvement as well.
Next. I think you saw next, and then I think.
Mohsin Abbas, Arts Mercer Consultancy. I'm really fascinated by this word ethics, ethical. I think it's fantastic that the Commonwealth Secretary seems to be focusing on this word as a key word. I'm really concerned about the fact that 95% of human values are universal. Human civilization, by and large, agrees on 95% of values. Yet all on the media, within general, on planet Earth Incorporated, we've got conflict on a scale which is, ever increasing, never ending. Perhaps that's never stoppable totally, but I think one area that the Commonwealth would certainly get involved is in perhaps highlighting and realising these common value, universal values, and coming up with a really concrete strategy and almost finding a niche.
Well, can I respond immediately on that? One of the things which I have not mentioned, but which will be a very central part of our report, is the proposal to create for the first time a charter of the Commonwealth. Because you've had various declarations at various Commonwealth conferences. They need to be brought together, but they also need to be brought up to date. And therefore there will be what we are recommending, if the heads of government accept this, is a charter of the Commonwealth, which will indeed try to focus on the values, the added value, the ways in which the Commonwealth stands for certain values, and where the United Nations can talk about it. The Commonwealth can actually have internal ways of seeking to actually ensure that behaviour corresponds to the objective.
So Malcolm, thank you so much for so important. I think this country has a very schizophrenic relationship with Commonwealth, with the Prime Minister saying things like multiculturalism is dead, and there's a lot of, more and more as an island, we're sort of shrinking into our own little identity of Britishness, whatever that is. I think until we can make the dialogue with people, always talk of power and they need our help, they're desperate. Well, we need to level the playing field, and how are you going to, through your report, I don't know if you've addressed it, but how are you going to engage the younger generation who have no concept of what Commonwealth is, don't care, it's about games, it's about football, or whatever it is. It's not, there is no real dialogue, and it's such an important resource that we bring it into the vernacular and make people aware of it. How is that going to happen?
Well, I think first of all, let me just comment very briefly on what the Prime Minister said. He was not saying we should have a uniform society with everyone looking, dressing, and behaving exactly the same. What he was essentially seeking to say, and I think was right to say, was that in any country, but he was talking about Britain, you have to have a core of common values that everyone accepts. They speak the language of the country, and in the case of the United Kingdom, our basic values are tolerance, the rule of law, democratic values. That's the sort of thing. Now, when people have a core of common values and common beliefs, which they are willing to accept and to share, the fact that they may wish to dress differently, have different religion, different cultural habits, or the United Kingdom is actually much more relaxed than France, for example, on issues of that kind. We don't tend to make a great issue of these sort of things, and that's important and not. So I think that's what he was trying to say. As far as how you deal with young people, would be crazy if they spent all their time thinking about the Commonwealth. Why should they? Or thinking about politics, or thinking about governance. You're only young ones who've got far more important things like playing football to do. But a large part of the Commonwealth happens to link in with what they are interested in, on the sports side, on the cultural side, things of that kind. So it's a question of actually responding to, and there's not just single views of young people. Some are much more serious than others. Some have very great enthusiasms for particular requirements. So you have to have a flexibility and a discretion there in that way.
President Backman first, I agree, and then you say it.
I was just a quick question. I just wanted to help on some of the points that were raised. The power of ideas or a vision, but also some of the practical issues that wanted to be addressed. And I think a lot of the problem with that is some of the issues, the ideas have to do with historical memory. And of course, you know, the Commonwealth is associated with the British Empire and whatnot.
Yes.
And that narrative is really powerful in lots of places. And I'm wondering if there's any way in which the report addresses this, or in ways which we can address it.
Yeah, first of all, the Commonwealth, of course, now has gone beyond the Empire countries, because Mozambique or Rwanda were never part of the Commonwealth at any time. So it's gone beyond that. But it's, in any event, what ties it together in terms of its history is not so much the British connection, it is English language. And it's the rule of law. You take the government of India, for example. India's civil service, its democracy, is because Indians decided that that kind of government, suitably adapted, met their own cultural and social requirements, albeit in not exactly the same way as it happens in Britain. So you have common values, you have a common language to it. That is perhaps the most important elements that are still hugely relevant. Please.
You say.
My name is Iyad Khan, and under what circumstances a Commonwealth country can be benefited?
Then you can carry on. That means there's a vote taking place.
Under what circumstances a country in the natural disaster or something can request the Queen or some head of the Commonwealth to help them? And what will be the...
If there are disasters or various problems of that kind, then that's an area where the Commonwealth should be able to help, because you need to have thought out in advance how you can best give an urgent response to when an emergency takes place. And I think both the United Nations and the Commonwealth, there's various ways in which that can be handled more professionally. Before I finish, let me just tell you, you're hearing that bell ringing. It means there's a division, a vote about to take place. On one occasion some years ago, some Americans were visiting the House of Commons for the first time, and they heard that bell ringing, and they were very anxious what it meant. And the lady went up to one of the police officers and said, "Can you explain the bell that's ringing? Is it a bomb scare? Is it a fire alarm? Is it some terrorist alert?" And the police officer said, "Don't worry, madam, it's not a terrorist alert. It's these members of parliament. One of them's escaped."
I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw this part of the meeting to an end.
I'm going to escape.
And you're going to escape also with Sir Alan Root, Chairman of the UK branch of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And we will miss you both.
Thank you very, very much. I tried to do
Right, I think we are now just going to continue. I'm sorry about it. But when you fix these dates, you're never quite sure when parliamentary elections are going to come. And this is just one of those unfortunate evenings. But I wonder, I can now turn to Terry Bamford and just say, would you say just a few words about Third World Solidarity?
Yes, I'm here because I'm a committee member of Third World Solidarity, but I'm also a board member of the Commonwealth Association for Social Work. And I actually suggested that it would be a good idea for Third World Solidarity to have a meeting on the Commonwealth and some of the issues raised by the Eminent Persons Group. Third World Solidarity was established 25 years ago by Mushtaq Lashari here and a number of colleagues. It's an organisation that is committed to peace, justice and democracy, but then isn't everybody, as Sir Malcolm pointed out, but specifically committed to the promotion of non-violence as a means of resolving conflict. And the spur to the establishment of Third World Solidarity was the bombing of Libya by the Americans. And it's ironic that here we are, 25 years on, and military means have been clearly not hugely successful in resolving that particular conflict. So we remain committed to non-violence. And in this context, the All-Party Parliamentary Group was established 3 years ago and has been under the chairmanship of Dave Anderson, MP. It's non-political and it's had a very significant number of meetings. Some of the highlights are Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner, who some of you may have heard, Gore Vidal, and then earlier this year Noam Chomsky speaking to a very full room and holding us really spellbound, I think, by his address. But as I said earlier, there's this overlap between the values expressed by Third World Solidarity and the Commonwealth. So the creation of the Eminent Persons Group was certainly, I think, viewed with a great deal of optimism by a number of organisations like Commonwealth Journalists Association, Commonwealth Broadcasting Association, and our own much smaller Commonwealth Organisation for Social Work. Because although the Commonwealth is a great institution, as we've heard, and is values-based, based on the rule of law, based on free expression, based on democracy and human rights, the truth of the matter is that it hasn't always walked the walk as effectively as it's talked the talk of those values. And Sir Malcolm recognised that, I thought, quite powerfully in relation to Sri Lanka. But there are a number of Commonwealth countries where there clearly have been abuses of human rights in the last 12 months, in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Uganda. And I think some of us have felt concerned that the Commonwealth has been relatively impotent in dealing with those. And it's very interesting to hear the kind of mechanisms that Sir Malcolm was talking about as a way of addressing those issues. One of the things which I think has heavily influenced the Eminent Persons Group was the Commonwealth Conversation. This was a dialogue initiated by the Royal Commonwealth Society in all the Commonwealth countries. And they carried out a very extensive survey in those countries. And unsurprisingly, the response that came back, particularly from young people, was that they saw the Commonwealth as an anachronism. As has been said, the Commonwealth Games and the Queen were really the two things that people could say about the Commonwealth. And I think we shouldn't underestimate, as our colleague here said, the significance of the Queen, because she came to the throne only 4 years after the Commonwealth replaced the Empire as part of the post-imperial legacy. And I think her personal contribution has been immense in maintaining the unity of the Commonwealth. And there has to be a big question mark about whether that will necessarily translate automatically to her successor. I think the Commonwealth has got huge potential still because, as has been said by Sir Malcolm, a quarter of the countries of the UN are members of the Commonwealth. And the issues that are relevant to the Commonwealth, on which the Commonwealth could make a distinctive contribution, I think, are those of climate change, where the Maldives, which Rita referred to earlier, is perhaps going to be first to be affected by rising sea levels. So it's a matter of immediate interest, particularly to the small island states, and where the Commonwealth, I think, could take a lead in the exercise of what Sir Malcolm termed soft power. The other area is HIV/AIDS, where a huge proportion of people living with HIV/AIDS are doing so in Commonwealth countries, and where there is experience that I think can be drawn from Commonwealth countries that can be useful in promoting country-wide solutions. But the question and the big dilemma, I think, is whether the recommendations of the EPG are actually going to be accepted by Commonwealth heads of government. The length and the blandness of the statements that are issued following Commonwealth heads of government meeting has increased with the increasing numbers of members. But actually, as if you look at the resources that are available to the Commonwealth Secretariat, they've actually reduced over the last 20 years by some 20%. So member governments have not been willing to put their money where their mouth is in terms of actually giving support to a strong secretariat. So to that extent, there's something slightly counterintuitive in the recommendations of the EPG in saying, let's really make the Commonwealth significant. Let's have a Commissioner for Human Rights and Democracy. Let's give the Secretary General the right to speak on behalf of the Commonwealth without having to refer back. And that's why I think it's very important for civil society organisations like our own, the Commonwealth Organisation of Social Work, to actually back this, because if we want the Commonwealth to survive and be a force for good in the way that it can, I think we need to put all the strength that we can behind the recommendations of the EPG. Thanks very much.
Elizabeth, would you like to say a few words, please?
I would, thank you very much indeed. And we've had Sir Malcolm giving us an overview which was largely political, and I thought it was excellent. And now we've had Terry Bamford also looking at some of the impact of the lack of funds and this tendency to wordiness in the Commonwealth and trying to do too much. So what I thought I would do is try and concentrate on the media side and look at why it is that the Commonwealth doesn't seem to be able to make an impact, reach the younger generations, and reach particularly those who pay a lot for the Commonwealth who are in a developed world. It was a major failure there. So I would say that I very much welcome this Eminent Persons Group report, and it's very good that it's adopted an open and consultative process. And the Commonwealth Media Group, which I'm chair, has in fact put forward its own views to the EPG, and some of them seem to be accepted in the draft recommendations. You can see this on the Commonwealth website, what the draft recommendations are. So it's a good process involving everybody. Now I'd say first of all, on the media side, the CMG welcomes the suggestion that the Secretariat's Public Affairs and Information processes should be overhauled. And then it goes on to say that it considers that in view of the many transgressions in Commonwealth countries of the principles of free expression, this is what Rita was talking about, Commonwealth governments should be asked to allocate some of their aid budgets to improving media standards in these offending countries. Now this is not included in this draft report, it's a great pity, but there we are, maybe we can still lobby for it. The experience of the Commonwealth media organisations, essentially the broadcasters, the journalists and the CPU, the media trust, is that interventions do improve standards and they do have a significant effect. And this is a field where the Commonwealth used to do a lot of useful work. There was a special fund for it, but it's now been abandoned, and the field is left just to UNESCO essentially. And by itself, UNESCO can't do as much as it used to do in partnership with the Commonwealth. So that's an area where things are getting worse, not better. And one other media move which the CMG welcomes is the call in the EPG report for full disclosure of Commonwealth discussions. It's been very frustrating over the years if you go to CHOGM and as a media person you find that no cameras, no microphones allowed in the session, there are hardly any briefings, there's a closing communique, that's about it. Getting interviews with leading figures is virtually impossible. So if the EPG is recommending a more open approach, I think this would bring the Commonwealth into the modern world. If you notice that the UN allows the cameras into selected sessions, and I don't see why the Commonwealth shouldn't allow the camera into one selected session to begin with. And it would show the world the Commonwealth in a very constructive and useful light. So if this recommendation were to be adopted in the Chogam at Perth, then you could at last see footage that goes beyond just showing the local dancers, which is what you get in the opening ceremony, and you get some real substance being shown around the world. Great advance, creeping towards the 21st century. Now, another idea that was put forward by the Commonwealth Media Group, which hasn't been adopted by them, is how to tackle the chronic shortage of funds which the Commonwealth suffers from. As Terry said, the EPG has got lots of suggestions and marvellous new things they should do, but they have no suggestions about where to find any money. Well, the CMG does have a suggestion, and this is that the Commonwealth governments should be urged to assign more funds from their aid budgets to the Commonwealth. And this, for example, is required mandatorily by the EU. I'm not suggesting it should be mandatory from the Commonwealth, but if they all got together and suggested that such and such a proportion of aid budgets should go to the Commonwealth, well, that's just a question of political will, and it should be possible to make it happen. It wouldn't increase the total spend of government, because nobody wants to do that at the moment. It would simply transfer budget. And the only interest that would lose out, I'll try and speak even louder, would be those of aid departments such as DFID. But with their very large budgets, I don't think they would notice. Now, my personal view is that it would be important that the effectiveness of such a transfer would then be judged according to Commonwealth criteria, not by DFID's criteria. So this would probably mean the funds being supervised by the FCO rather than DFID. Then the CMG welcomes the suggestion for a Commission for Democracy and the Rule of Law. Just as Sir Malcolm did, I think it's a very important suggestion, and as he said, it's their top suggestion, and it should lead to a lot of action. And such action and such initiatives that it suggests would make it much easier to promote the Commonwealth. You need to have somebody standing there saying controversial and interesting things, and it has been a bit lacking in recent years. My own view is that the Secretary-General doesn't need to be specially authorised to do this. The power is there for the seizing, and it should be seized. But anyway, if the EPG recommends that the Secretary-General should do these kind of interviews and take a more proactive line, I think that's wonderful, and let us hope that this then gets much more material which is worth broadcasting and worth promoting around the world. Now, there's also a suggestion in this EPG report that there should be academies for democracy and election training set up. Well, the CMG doesn't think much of this. It thinks that that's setting up yet another institution. All the overheads involved. It would be much easier to set up a fund and let existing organisations compete for it. They also suggest an additional post at the Secretariat. This would be to administer additional bursaries. But again, the CMG thinks don't have an extra post, just have a fund and let people compete for the additional money. Put all the money into the bursaries, not into their administration. And then there's an EPG recommendation which I greatly welcome, and that's that the People's Forum should be held in the year in between Chogams, not immediately before Chogam, as at present. I've personally been campaigning for this for many years, ever since I went to my first Chogam, and I saw how civil society events organised there are completely ignored by the heads of state and also by all the journalists, because the journalists there are diplomatic correspondents. They're not interested in civil society things. They only want the main meat of the Chogam decision. And so they've been battling against the odds. Whereas if they ran their event a year before Chogam, looked ahead to CHOGM so that they would have some resolutions to put to CHOGM that could be considered in the proper time, in the proper slow Commonwealth time frame. They would make much, much more impact, and they would provide a sort of advance guard of publicity for the coming CHOGM. And then I have a criticism of the EPG draft report. It's says Terry that it's too long and it ranges much too widely. It reminds me of a CHOGM communique. It's got everything thrown into it. I think the Commonwealth should focus on fewer activities and on making more impact through them. Adding new activities, which is what this suggests, without additional funding, it simply spreads the butter even thinner. So personally, I would close some activities down, and I would like to see the EPG recommending which ones. With the money saved, I would transfer some funds to a world-class information department to publicise the work of the Commonwealth, some of which is very good indeed. The EPG report does mention discarding ineffective programs, but it has suggestions for many, many more new ones. It calls for a budget increase for the Secretariat, but it doesn't say how this can be achieved. So I covered this earlier. It could be achieved through a transfer from aid budgets. So the danger looming is that if CHOGM accepts all these EPG recommendations, the Commonwealth Secretariat will be required to implement numerous new programs out of existing funding, and they'll find it very hard to close any activities without a steer from the EPG as to which ones should close. Well, that's not going to help the Commonwealth. It could actually make it less effective. So, finally, this is my last comment. I find that as I travel around various Commonwealth countries, I find great warmth towards the Commonwealth in the developing countries, and especially, as has already been mentioned, in the small states for whom it's an indispensable route into the wider world. But in the developed parts of the Commonwealth, there's less and less interest. And there's hardly any public awareness there of what it does, especially, as we've already said, among the younger generation. But these, of course, are the countries which provide most of the funding for the activities of the Commonwealth. So this development is a very major threat to its future, which nobody seems to be focusing on. It's in the developed world that I would prioritise my publicity spend in the years ahead. The Commonwealth does a huge amount of good work in supporting free elections, aid programs, cultural, civil society connections, education, information, sport. But my priority would be to ensure that people, and particularly people in the developed world, begin to hear much more about what is going on in the Commonwealth.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for that. Lots of thoughts there for me. And Mushtaaq, I wonder whether we could ensure that a copy of Elizabeth's speech is sent to someone. I think it really would be helpful. And it's just regrettable that the parliamentary timetable, he wasn't actually able to hear.
A lot of it was directed at him, actually. Never mind. So lovely.
Can I now move on to Mr. Shaheen Nadeem, journalist and writer. Would you like to say a few words, sir?
Thank you. It's my privilege, and I apologize. Any Commonwealth visitor would get lost in this deluge of tourists from European community and NATO countries. So things have changed here, and so I couldn't get there in time. But yes, I come from the other end of the spectrum, you can say, from Pakistan, where obviously Commonwealth has kind of apparently appears to have lost its steam or its relevance, because the issues have become so complex and there is a kind of polarization. And obviously there is, Commonwealth does have a colonial legacy also, or an image which games, or the image of the Queen as as a symbol of global cultural unity, or other initiatives taken by Commonwealth have kind of made Commonwealth an organization with relevance, and perhaps the only organization where countries from the third world or developing countries and developed countries, they sit together, and they don't only have a colonial past to share, but also common history and common culture and common economic or political concerns. I think until like 10 or 15 years ago, it seemed to have been more relevant, and it was more prominent. Even the Commonwealth Institute here in West London was actually playing a fairly prominent role in a lot of interesting activities relating to like South Asian countries, for example, were taking place there. And the Commonwealth role in promoting education and human rights and media training, I think that is something which needs to be reinforced and strengthened, because the problems have not gone away, unfortunately, in most of the member countries. Especially speaking about Pakistan, I think that there is a great need, for example, of media training, because media, the electronic media in particular, has become independent and has become very democratic and very free, but the society is still shackled by so many problems and sectarian issues and religious issues, political, ethnic. So media has kind of gone far ahead of the rest of the society, which is causing a lot of tensions, and we have untrained media anchors or media owners who are actually wittingly or unwittingly playing a very dangerous and negative role in the kind of situation which we have in Pakistan. So I think Commonwealth Broadcasters Association or other media or journalist organization, they have a lot of role to play. And one other thing which I think it can be a great achievement, and where I think Britain has an obligation also, is to promote the India-Pakistan peace process, where so many issues have actually originate from the independence and the way independence was executed in 1947. So, and Britain, because of the common cultural and historical heritage which we have, and somehow Britain is not seen like the US is seen in today's politically polarized society. So people still consider that Britain is still a part of their history or legacy also. So I think that Commonwealth, led by Britain, can play and should play a more active role in resolving issues between India and Pakistan and promoting better relations, people to people, and cultural relations between the two countries. As far as the relative sort of you can say lack of success is concerned of Commonwealth initiatives, I think if that is any reason for consolation, other regional initiatives have also failed. Islamic Summit has always been a non-starter. SAARC has hardly played any role. There is a Central Asian organization which is also hardly anyone knows about it. So I think that these regional organizations have also failed, and maybe if Commonwealth is redefined in a way so that instead of just basing itself on the common historical sort of experiences, if the present day conflicts and the present day issues are addressed more forcefully and with more involvement from the people and the intellectuals of the concerned countries, I think it can still be a very useful and very relevant organization. Thank you.
Well, let me just, on your behalf, thank the various speakers. I think what is interesting, one of the things which Sir Malcolm said was the greatest threat to the Commonwealth was indifference. I think in some of the larger members, it clearly is important for a very small, tiny island state. But what is important, I think, is that we take the report of the Eminent Persons Group and discuss it as much as possible, as we're doing this evening, so that it is not just another report which is read and then neatly filed, but that it should revive interest in the Commonwealth. Now, is there anybody else who would like to make a contribution? Yes, sir.
It's a very elegant expression of desire from Mr. Shahid to ask the Commonwealth to promote media and also the peace process between India and Pakistan and subcontinent. But very few people ever mention the severe persecution of minorities in Pakistan, Christians as well as Hindus. There is no direct representation of minorities in Pakistan, and there is systematic persecution, marginalization, discrimination against the minorities in Pakistan. And I think that the Commonwealth should take note of it, and this should be the silence on behalf of the Commonwealth is a complicity in the continued degradation of Christians and Hindus in Pakistan. There is very little, if any, human rights which is accorded to Christians and Hindus in Pakistan. And Mr. Chairman, you should very kindly take note of what I'm saying. I've been in this country for 40 years. I travel to Pakistan every 3 months. I have charity work in Pakistan. And Mr. Ashari, I'm grateful to you, sir, for inviting me. And I'm privileged to be here this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. I mean, Sir Malcolm spoke about the Commonwealth being a values-based organization and talked about the rule of law as being fundamental to the Commonwealth. And I think he has raised quite clearly an issue where the Commonwealth is not delivering as some of us would have wished and would have chosen. Right, anybody else? So, you first, then you say.
Yeah, a lot of questions come out. I mean, don't just in your comments there, but it seemed to me that what you were saying could be dealt with much better on a bilateral basis. You know, Britain working with India and Pakistan, what's it got to do with Tuvalu and the Fiji Islands? And, you know, so many of these things are essentially bilateral. And I don't think that's a role for the Commonwealth.
It's not happening for the last 63 years.
Well, I don't know enough about what Britain does, but it doesn't seem to me that a loose association of countries can help in the way that perhaps one neutral country could help. So I think that one should look at what can the Commonwealth do that is unique to the Commonwealth, and I don't suggest that is one. I like the points that Mrs. Smith suggests. Do less, but do it better. And I think that there is too much too thinly spread, and I think that concentrating on a few things and doing them better would make a lot more sense. Otherwise, I just think the Commonwealth is going to disappear. I don't see the future. Another idea, people keep on mentioning all the small countries. Well, I think that is a very interesting case. Perhaps the Commonwealth should really find itself to specifically help the small countries. India with 1 billion people and Pakistan with 200 million doesn't really need the Commonwealth in my view. But the small islands, the small countries, they possibly do a different kind of Commonwealth?
The small countries, I think, would benefit from the Commonwealth for talking to some of the larger countries like India and Pakistan. Without it, I think they will probably
But talking,
never have a forum.
what's talking, it's doing, it's action.
Fair enough. I'm going to take, sorry, this gentleman here, and then I will lady in front of him.
I only want to say a couple of words about my friend complaining about treatment of Christians and other minorities. There is no treatment of anyone. There are incidents that they can happen to anyone, not specifically Christians or anyone else. They are totally free to do whatever they want.
Okay, well, we've got two different views here. Now, so there's a lady in front of you. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. What the gentleman behind was saying, I don't know his name.
Peter David.
Okay. Peter David, okay. Me being a Muslim, brought up in Pakistan, and attended the mission schools. All I can say that my parents felt proud to send me to a Christian school, and that's all most of the parents in Pakistan do, so there's no discrimination as far as their Christianity or anything is concerned. I studied myself in St. Joseph Mission School. There are so many schools in Pakistan, in Karachi, and parents, they queue up to send their children to those schools. So that itself proves that there is absolutely no discrimination as far as their Christianity or any minority is concerned. Otherwise, they wouldn't be queuing up. Okay, that was one thing. The other thing is they were talking about interest in young people, Commonwealth. Obviously, they know about Commonwealth Games and young people like that, so they go there. I mean, it's just my humble suggestion that we have, in Trafalgar Square, we had events like Canada Day, which is coming up. We had events like Spanish Day. Why can't we have something like Commonwealth Day in Trafalgar Square? And I can guarantee you there will be loads of young people, they will come and find it interesting, and they will know what exactly Commonwealth is all about. It's not just politics, but if we have, big screens